Welcome to tonight's play, a reinterpretation of French philosopher Alain Badiou's reinterpretation of Plato's Socratic dialogue, The Republic, presented by RedBagel, a group working for the emancipation of everything ever. Alain Badiou calls his reading of Plato's major philosophical work, devoted to the topic of justice, a hyper-translation, or, put differently, a formally restructured, universalized, and dramatized variant of Plato's text displaced into the present. Plato's The Republic was originally structured into 10 chapters, which Badiou rearranged into 16 chapters, each addressing a different topic relevant to the existence of a just republic. RedBagel chose to reinterpret Badiou's Chapter 8, titled Women and Families, not only because it addresses issues with which they are concerned, but also because they thought Badiou did not go far enough. In his hyper-translation, Badiou, deviating from Plato's set of characters, feminized Plato's brother Adeimantus into Amantha. Though striving to challenge the patriarchal structure, Badiou's Amantha continues to play by its rules, which prompted RedBagel to emancipate the character by creating her feminist alter ego, resulting in a Janus-like Amantha figure in the play that you're about to see. The other characters as described by RedBagel are Socrates, the master, Glaucon, an old-school phallus and man-child, also Plato's older brother, and Thrasymachus, a queer, postmodern, desiring machine sophist. Here they are, gathered in a villa on the Haber of Athens, at Mudfest. It was getting darker and darker. Here and there, the oil lamps were describing little circles within which the light flickered bravely. Socrates was about to go over the 4 defective systems of government in the logical and historical order governing their interrelationship when Thrasymachus suddenly touched Amantha's bare shoulder. The stern young woman bridled at first, then realized that he was only trying to get her attention. She leaned in close to him and whispered in her ear.
Are we going to let him get around this obstacle as though he hadn't even seen it?
No, we definitely have to keep him from doing that.
Keep who from doing what?
You. From treating us like fools.
Oh, Amantha, what have I done?
You treat us with an inexcusable lack of seriousness, if you don't mind my saying so. You skip over a question of the utmost importance, just so you don't have to get your feet wet. Do you think you can get off the hook by casually dropping into the conversation that, where women and children are concerned, let me quote that phrase of yours, friends share everything in common?
But isn't that true?
Unless it's referring to something obscene, I, as a young woman, have no idea what that sentence even means. What exactly is supposed to be shared in common? We've been badgering you for ages to expound your views on sexual difference, procreation, and the upbringing of young children. But every single time you've been indirect and evasive. Once, you practically laughed in our faces. And I quote, "I'm like old Tolstoy." When he was asked what he thought about all this, he replied he wouldn't say the last word on women until the lid on his coffin was closed. You're not going to move on to the 4 non-communist systems of government without first explaining, inside out and upside down, everything related to sex.
I have to say that I won't let you get around this crucial issue in your sneaky way either.
You're in deep trouble now, Socrates. As I've always said, whenever we finally get around to concrete issues, Socrates dubstep.
What are you up to, dear friends? What kind of quibbling are you starting up again at? The darkest edges of collective life. I thought I cleverly avoided these questions about sex, and that you'd therefore settle for my brief allusions to equality. But now you're stirring up a hornet's nest. It'll take us the next 2 days to deal with all this.
So what if it does? Do you think we're here at Mudfest just to snore away cheerfully or listen to platitudes? If sex is on the agenda now, you have to explain your sexual theory to us, period.
But with this type of subject, The discussion always goes on for an inordinate length of time.
When it comes to sex, dear friend, there are no time limits. An entire lifetime wouldn't be enough to cover the topic adequately. Everyone's so fascinated with it. So never mind about us. Just answer our questions for once and expand your doctrine on the education of women, including sex. Don't play the uptight philosopher. Don't shy away from the stuff about nudity and fucking, and tell us how the awful drudgery of babies and toddlers should be handled too. You'll see what our reaction is.
He's right, Socrates. Your listeners tonight are educated, open-minded people, prepared to accept the most revolutionary new ideas. Put your suspicions and fears aside. I'd like to add that I myself would be happy to contribute to the sexual education of women, if you get my meaning. Ha 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 ha!
Oh, Glaucon. You think you're reassuring me by saying that, but you're only increasing my anxiety. If I had complete confidence in myself about the real knowledge underlying what I say, your encouragement would be most welcome. On account of what you're trying to force me to say, I kneel trembling before the big other, the distinguished judge of sexual matters. We're all aware that, in the other's eyes, involuntary manslaughter is a lesser crime than misleading people about what's noble, good, and just in collective life. But if that crime has to be committed, as you would have me do, it would be better to be dealing with enemies than friends. Pushing me to my limits isn't a good thing. No, it certainly isn't.
My dear Socrates, even if your speech were to exile us from the country of truth, we'd acquit you of murder, and by the same verdict, of fraud. Thrasymachus and I are the sophists here, and we won't have you stealing our lines. So you can speak without fear of having to drink the fatal hemlock.
Socrates then awed his audience with a lengthy silence, his face a frozen, inscrutable mask. At last he relaxed and said with broad smile of his mechanical trapdoor mouth,
It's true that, according to our laws, anyone acquitted of murder regains his innocence completely. So the same will hold for me if you acquit me of fraud. Am I correct?
Yes, yes. Whatever innocence he had in the first place anyway, proceed with your lesson. You have no further reason for remaining silent.
Unfortunately, I, the philosophical stage director of male roles, shall now have to deal with the female roles so that the play can be performed.
And that's a lot different, isn't it?
It's impossible! The female role is to be mirror in which man sees himself. If he truly assumed our role, he would disappear.
Not as much as all that, young lady. Not as much as all that. After all, our conception of the development of everyone's leadership abilities has nothing whatsoever to do with sex. On the contrary, it assumes that we attribute to women a basic nature and ways of being that are more or less the same as men's, even if this means we then have to take a look at whether this principle can really work.
Yeah, a very close look.
Honestly, you're such an idiot. Think back to the comparison that was made between the temporary leaders of our communist country and clever, faithful guard dogs guarding a peaceful flock of ordinary citizens, from which the guardians come, of which they're merely a detachment. Your idea wouldn't happen to be the female dogs are only good for bearing puppies, and that the protection and leadership duties have to be reserved for the males, would it?
Well, that's not what I said.
Well, buddy, if you think women could do the job the same as men, don't you have to feed them, train them, and educate them exactly the same way as men?
Socrates, is that what you really think?
I have no choice. Listen, if we expect women to provide the same services as men, then we must give them the same basic education. We based the education of our guardians, meaning all our citizens, on literature, music, and physical training. And there's no reason to change that just because we're dealing with women. The same will hold true later on when we talk about higher education and about mathematics and the dialectic in particular. It'll be to everyone's benefit.
And women will do military training too?
Definitely. But we hope to put an end to the monstrosity of those wholesale slaughters we call wars. But if we're attacked, we'll defend ourselves.
With women at the forefront.
That's what I've always said.
This is absurd. What about modesty? What about sexual difference? What about sexual desire? We all know it's common practice for men to train in the nude, shower together in the locker room, tell dirty jokes and all that kind of stuff. Can you picture beautiful, naked young women, their breasts bouncing in the sunlight amid such a group of heathens? Their pert nipples would be standing up at attention from the delicate breeze caressing them. The men would be driven to distraction. The empire would fall in a day. What if one of these nymphs were to look upon a gaggle of flopping penises and laugh? Our soldiers might never recover from such humiliation. Or conversely, what if the women were driven into such a state of arousal by the sight of our firm, muscular buttocks that she became overheated and passed out? Whose job would it be to take care of her then? As usual, the duty would fall to the men. Socrates, I'm really certain this idea has no future.
Dear Glaucon, in our country, there will never be just a handful of naked women in the midst of a whole flock of men. But there definitely will be the love between a woman and a man in the refuge of their private lives. Besides which, there will be humanity as a whole. Old, black, heavy, white, light, women, cross-eyed, hunchbacked, young, yellow, wan, glowing with health, transgendered, every conceivable kind of body, as mixed as they are different from one another. Bodies whose possible nudity will not signify anything but the simple fact that they're jointly performing the same drills requiring nudity, a very rare requirement as I see it. Every individual will get over the particular differences involved in one or another of these joint drills, whichever way he can, but with the same degree of enthusiasm.
Love! He speaks of love. Yet we all know what man's love means to us women. Oh, they love us as long as we work for it. They love us. Oh, what they love in us is the labor that we commit for them, for the pleasure of their express and fleshy other, and for the growth of their economy, from which we will always be excluded. How can he speak of love between classes that have nothing in common? When man speaks of love, women should run in the opposite direction. As long as they remain men, we owe nothing to them, and especially not the affection. And on top of it all, in the refuge of the private life, private life. Our woman's social survival has required the acceptance of both subordination on our side and responsibility on theirs. So how dare he speak of privacy to us? The refuge of the private life, as it has been historically drawn by men, is what perpetuates our subordination to them. His home is our factory, where we, women, remain eternally divided and alienated among his values. No, there can only be love among women, or there can be love among women and dead men.
If our dear old Aristophanes were to see one of those very rare nude co-ed drills Socrates described, he would find plenty of material in it to back up his male chorus leader's furious speech. Do you remember in Lysistrata?
don't stand up tall. And forward show those who, with just their bare hands, they will all spread the seeds of the blackest coup. They will sharpen their knives with the will, nor to cut off our balls will they quill, silver reefs to the brim they will fill with shit they bring home by the pail, riding his prick astride him his feet. This a man must have seen in his life to fathom what darkness can breed in the heart of his wanton wife.
Well, I see you have quite an extensive repertoire. But Aristophanes is not going to keep us from saying that women can and must, naked if required by the oddity of the situation, pilot our fighter planes, command our assault tank divisions, and be in charge stealthily beneath the sea of our nuclear submarines. The truth is, hiding or exhibiting this or that part of the body is only a matter of the contingency of customs. It's so silly to hit the ceiling just because a woman shows her thighs, but it's no less so to pass laws, as the French do, prohibiting a woman from covering her hair with a headscarf. Only idiots find something that's merely a custom different from their own to be ridiculous or scandalous. We ought to be wary of anyone who wants us to be outraged about these trivial things, and not about what's truly insane or dangerous, about having intentions completely opposed to the good that derives from available truths.
That kind of blowhard is usually a fascist without even knowing it.
If I were a communist, I'd be worrying about the coming war between the pedophiles and the lesbians, who will then unite against normal men, like me and Thrasymachus.
Why do you feminists and political intellectuals always engage in this heterosexual moralizing? What do you get out of it? Any worker would hate you, but you have no hatred because you are bourgeois, privileged, smooth-skinned types, dispensing justice and judgment from your ivory towers. None of you have the guts to admit that one can enjoy swallowing the shit of capital, its materials, its metal bars, its plastic cups, its DVDs, its hamburgers, swallowing tons of it until you burst. And because instead of saying this, which is also what happens in the desires of those who work with their hands and asses, you become a leader of men, a leader of pimps. You lean forward and tell us, don't you get it? That's alienation. We'll save you from it. We will work to liberate you from this wicked affection for servitude and give you dignity. And in this way, you situate yourselves on the most despicable side, the moralistic side, where you desire that our capitalized desire be totally ignored, brought to a standstill. You're like priests with sinners. Our obedient intensities frighten you. How we must suffer to endure that. And of course we suffer, we slaves to capital, but that doesn't mean that we do not enjoy. Fuck you and your remedy. We hate the medicine of love and its Vaseline. We prefer to burst under the excesses that you judge the most stupid, and do not wait for us to rise up in revolt either.
Yeah. But there's nothing new here. Nothing that we didn't already know. We all know that capitalism is fun, and people like to screw. Relax, Thrasymachus. Nobody is trying to limit your eroticized body here. The problem with you is that you constantly imagine that we, for some reason, are wholly consumed with your dick, when in reality, you need our moralization to frame your periphery. But in case you did not notice, no one here is concerned with your pleasures nor your pains. We are speaking of women and their role in the Republic. We do not expect you to rise up and revolt on behalf of this problem.
But friends, our main concern here is to come to an agreement on the issue of whether our ideas are feasible or not. And, to that end, to summon an interrogator who will discuss them in an attempt to find out whether the female branch of the human species is capable of sharing all the tasks of the male branch, or none of them, or maybe just some of them, and to what category of tasks everything related to war should be assigned.
No, Socrates, your ideas are not feasible, or they are except they're constructed on the ruins of those who refuse the promises of a future obsessed with the preservation of the Father's name. And you call us narcissists. You look for meaning, eternally deferred in the image of the child emptied and unmarked by the corruption of having to live in a world burdened with encounters with those that you and your churches don't approve of. Glaucon, we know that at the moment of birth, the child brings sexuality with it into the world. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. The fascists know, and they're right to call us sinners, because our queer life is where your fantasies go to die. It is a culture of death. You may not need us in your fine city, but you will certainly have us.
Here we go again. Thrasymachus claiming his sacred periphery. So we have our men above ground and our men below ground, but still no room for women.
And thus, the battle begins. At last, we have come to the deadlock of sexual difference. Is there a woman, or is there not? As usual, we're stuck again between two non-choices. If we listen to Thrasymachus and Glaucon, we have jouissance, pure orgiastic enjoyment of the situation, and nothing more.
Oh, this is really too much.
And that one, my counterpart, with her endless begging for equal rights, wages with men, which Socrates so generously offers to redress. Ah, sisters, beware. Do not lose your head in this dead end. These options are the limits of the male economy itself. You will find no freedom in this battle. Thrasymachus speaks of pain and the pleasure of suffering. Yet anybody can be taught to enjoy its pain. Have we women not learned to moan while our bodies were brutalized? We have smiled most pleasantly through the suffering for ages. What is new or radical here?
Enough! Boys, we are not here to watch your little hijinks, but talk about sexual difference. We're waiting.
But look at us. Are we not different? We are different too.
You have no clue what difference is. True difference must secret itself. Difference is a virus. For us, joy and terror are a spiraling vertigo that we will use to destroy your paeans to sexual difference. A vertigo where the ego is broken into a million shards of shattered iPhone screens and glass dolphin paperweights. Spare us from your drama of totalization. You talk about difference in your journals, your conferences, your tribunals. We are difference. We walk among you, with you, one of you, and you don't even know it.
Yeah! Awesome!
Male society has no problems admitting that women are victims of their power, their wrong, their structure. They have no problem letting women into their game as a gesture of reparations. But this is a contradiction in itself. It remains to be their game, their men's game, and they, the men, remain to be sole players in it. This invitation is a trap. In fact, these are male solutions for the problem of sexual difference. And these positions take the patriarchal economy for granted by structuring their solutions within this unquestioned economy. The master-slave couple, like the man-woman couple, is to be taken as a relation rather than as two terms that are both positively marked. Otherwise, one posits two sexes in the old dream of symmetry. In reality, no true transcendence can exist for women without gendered transgression. A woman must take her experience as a measure of the world, her interest as a criterion for judging it, her desires as a motive for changing it, so that the world may then become her own responsibility.
You two sure are tough. Amantha, I have a thought. Let's try this. Why don't you play the part of the obstinate interlocutor, the guy who's sure that, thanks to him, we're going to fall flat on our faces?
Gladly. Okay, here I go. Look, everybody, there's absolutely no need for other people to challenge your contradictions. You contradict yourself enough as is. When you first summarize the true nature of a country and its government, you emphasize the division of labor and acknowledge that the taste for a given occupation had to do with each person's natural aptitudes.
Well, of course we did. But often, spurred on by you, we revised our analysis in a communist direction. Everyone has to be able to handle everything.
Oh, but certainly not to the point of disregarding our natural symbolic difference as crucial as sexual difference. No, will you deny the ontological nature, so to speak, of that difference, gentlemen?
Not at all. Women and men have virtually nothing in common.
Well, they have us in common, you idiot.
So, gentlemen, the noose of contradiction tightens around your argument and strangles all the life out of it. It's absurd to argue, on the one hand, that the state must be administered in the manner best suited to its unique nature, and to that end, a highly skilled, homogeneous workforce, coming from the masses of ordinary workers, must be trained, and, on the other hand, that both the subjective and the objective difference between men and women can simply be ignored as far as all this is concerned. Can you clear up that inconsistency for us, dear brother?
Consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds.
As always, coherence and contradiction expresses the force of a desire.
God, what about you, Socrates?
I've been saying all along that the question of the sexes is a labyrinth worse than the Minotaurs.
And what's more, that guy Theseus needed a woman to get out of it.
Ah, yes, Ariadne, the eternal abandoned woman. Can you see why I'm tempted to abandon this discussion?
But you won't.
Ah, you know me so well. After all, whether you fall into a duck pond or the Atlantic Ocean, all you can do is swim. So, let us take the plunge and hope that, as with the poet Arion in the legend, a dolphin will take us on his back and set us down safe and sound on the rock on Cape Tenerium.
Oh, great. What an adventure.
Well, dealing with one woman alone is already a wild and woolly adventure. But all women at once?
To deal with woman is neither to deal with one nor the many. In this adventure, man is the one, and measured against that one, woman is only a zero.
You can do it, Socrates. Confront the lesbians.
Well, if you order me to. Let's see now. Let's recap our problem. If human beings have truly different natures, it's unlikely that they'll be suited for the same tasks in the same way. Now, men and women do have different natures. Therefore, we can't conclude, as we did, that if they're educated in the same way, men and women will accomplish the same leadership tasks equally effectively. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I really can't see how we're going to find a way out of this.
Well, the dialectic, that's no more than the skillful manipulation of counter-arguments. The false dialectic is sure as hell powerful.
Me not understand.
Shut up,
Glauky
Glauc.
confused.
A lot of people unwittingly rush into this kind of dispute, and imagine they're really unifying opposing viewpoints, dialecticizing, when all they're doing is just squabbling with each other. Why? Because they're incapable of resolving a problem on the basis of the immanent multiplicity of ideas that they contain. For them, the process of countering an opponent remains at a purely verbal level, and so the whole discussion is merely a matter of contentious sophistry, not dialectic.
Fine, fine, fine. But what does all this have to do with the business about sex?
Well, we too are likely the unwitting victims of pseudo-counter-arguments. Basing ourselves on the supposed self-evidence of the words man and woman, we object to ourselves that the same tasks can't suit natures that are so different from each other. And yet, we haven't even examined beforehand the ideas of difference and sameness. Nor have we examined the type of relationship we have in mind when we assign different tasks to different natures, and the same tasks to the same natures.
But Socrates, can you give some examples other than men and women? What about monkeys and robots? After all, was it not the famous seminar of Alexander Kojève that substituted desire for spirit in the Hegelian dialectic and thus replaced animals with machines as man's primary antagonist?
Shut up, Glaucon.
Well, to begin with, ask yourself whether, among the males of the human species, the bald ones and the ones with hair are the same, or whether they constitute two mutually exclusive groups. Then, once you've observed that there's a real difference between them, draw the conclusion from this, that the bald men must not be allowed to fish if we see that many men with hair are good at fishing.
This is insane! It's all completely insane! I don't understand anything! You must be kidding!
Not at all. I want to stress this. When we determine that there's a difference between people, we've got to be aware right away that it's practically never a question of an absolute difference. The kind of difference we're talking about is relevant to the tasks that we claim it's important for. For example, the categories bald and with hair surely constitute a significant difference as regards the quality of being a hairstylist's client. But that difference is meaningless when it comes to fishing. Thank you. When we say that in humanity as a whole, the subgroup of women differs from that of men, we need to specify with respect to which skill we're conceiving that difference, in order to ultimately assign the monopoly of said task to the one or to the other. If it appears that the sexes only differ in regard to the material process of reproduction, the females bear and give birth to children, while the males just deposit their seed in the woman's womb, there's nothing about that that can convince us that men and women differ as to political skill. So, we'll stick with our point of view. The guardians in charge of the country's affairs at any given time can just as easily be female as male guardians.
I'm not sure that'll suffice to shut up all the big macho males who think that women are only good for sewing, cooking, cleaning, wiping kids' asses, vacuuming, and spreading their legs.
Well, let's once again ask our opponent, the disciple of Aristophanes and the whole reactionary clique, to tell us what skill or task is, in the political realm, only suitable for men, and that women have no natural talent for. I'm waiting.
Oh, he'll skirt the issue. He'll whine, like Glaucon did just now, that it's a tricky question, and off the top of his head, he can't come up with an answer. Or, like Thrasy Marcus, napping back there, that thinking is fine, but fucking is better. Sex is everywhere.
Which is tantamount to saying it's nowhere. With the criteria we're using, it's clear that in a lot of different fields, many women are better than a lot of men. But it's also clear that many men are superior to some women. So we can't conclude anything, except that when it comes to governing a country, there's no task that's appropriate for women qua women, or appropriate for men qua men. Natural talents have been distributed equally between the two sexes, and consequently, women are naturally fit for all tasks, just as men are.
But how would you argue against the many reactionary pricks who will say, and yet there are loads of chicks who are lousy at math, and very few, maybe even none at all, who are, I don't know, chiefs of staff?
Well, dear Amantha, I would reply that differences like that are obviously the result of prejudices that have affected the education of girls for centuries, to the detriment of equality between the sexes. As for us, let's maintain that every task should be open to women as well as to men. We'll say quite simply that some women are good at medicine, and others are less so. Some women love music, others don't much care for it. Some women are extremely attracted to the art of war, others are disgusted by it. Some women are philosophers, others prefer sophistry. Some women are brave, others are fearful. Exactly like men. Our obligatory conclusion will be that nothing should prevent any woman from filling a position of leadership when it's her turn to do so. Women and men alike can defend the country, and if that nature has seemed weaker in women for such a long time, it's because it was deliberately atrophied in them by ruthless educational segregation and insidious propaganda about the so-called weakness of the female sex.
He still doesn't get it. He says that sexual difference should not prevent us women from participating in the city. Yet in actuality, no one but men have prevented women from acting on behalf of their difference. Our essence has profound roots, which escape us because they don't belong to us. Without our knowledge, our biology has been turned into our destiny. Yes, we must fight against this subordinate position. But if the main aim of the feminist struggle is for equality with men, then I must say the struggle is misdirected. Since this effort for equality is an ideological attempt to subject women even further to the service of men, his country, his victories, his defeats. It is not a matter of chance that when women fills the role of leadership within a patriarchal society, she literally only fills a role that has been abandoned by another man. Thus, historically, the traditionally male profession that woman is now allowed to fill, thank you, allowed to fill becomes feminized and denigrated. For women to lead within the economy of phallic production can only depend on the subordination of other women of less fortunate classes. In this previously male and now feminized roles, woman falls into role of middle manager of patriarchal economy. But the symmetry of sexual difference cannot be resolved in this way. History has to be erased on our own terms.
Everyone can say they were much more resilient than men.
Oh, not again. Here's the false triumph that a lot of us strong women fall into. Please. Beware of promoting women's resilience to men. The promotion of our capacity to strain will only grant us more work.
That's very true. And there's nothing better in politics than the commitment of all those women who are as resilient as they are remarkable. This excellence in women will be enhanced from childhood on by literature, poetry, music, and physical training, as we've outlined in our academic curriculum.
No, and he confirms my fear. Woman's fortune today is that many roles that they're granted have been discredited. Make way for the slaves. Oh, let us hope that women will think twice before claiming victory. Here, a break must be made with the past in regards to the upbringing of children. The task of those to whom education of the children is confined should not consist in shaping little girls into a masculine mold. but in assuring the development of children independent of the sex that is assigned to them, then perhaps new form of symbolic can arise.
Which implies that, if necessary, we'll have to strip naked, like the males.
Woo! Everyone get naked! Mudfest! Woo! Woo!
Of course. But a woman who's forced to strip naked because one task or another in the service of the community requires it will have all the clothes she needs in her militant virtue. As for the men who might be tempted to make off-color jokes, we'll say, like Pindar, before it is ripe, they don't give a hoot. They select and they pluck laughter's sweet fruit. Those males stupidly laugh at the very same thing that they themselves do, on the ridiculous pretext that a woman is doing it too. They'd be better off sticking with the saying, what benefits us is as beautiful as what harms us is ugly.
The benefit of a drill can be symbolized by female nudity, which has always been the very image of beauty. No.
On that point, Socrates could only agree with the young woman.
Well, then that concludes this chapter as I see it. The wave that arose from this old business about the role of women and their education hasn't overwhelmed us in the least. Absolute equality between men and women from this perspective is not only a question of principle for us, but we're also able to prove that it's the most beneficial thing for the community as a whole.
But Glaucon, for his part, didn't feel that the communist lawmaker was out of the woods quite yet.
There's still another wave that could drown us for good this time.
Another wave? What wave is that?
What becomes of that primordial unit of society, the family, in your conception of things? Who'll take care of the children? And incidentally, in this context, what becomes of equality between women who carry the unborn child in their wombs, who nourish the fetus with their own blood, who give birth in pain, who nurse the baby, and men who had nothing to do with the whole business other than just screwing? But above all, in your conception of things, what becomes of the family? The family, as we know, is the place where all the wealth is concentrated, and where, in an absolutely unjustified way, it's passed on to individual heirs and not to the community as a whole. Even if it's a matter of factories, banks, artistic treasures, apartment buildings, forests, and so on. The family seems to me to be absolutely necessary for raising children, while at the same time, since it's complicit with the worst aspects of private property, it's a pillar of an inegalitarian society, and what's more, the fetish of every reactionary system of government, bar none. What do you have to say about such a paradox, Socrates?
Breeder scum. Is that a wedding ring?
Grow up, Thrasymachus. I have a hedge fund and an internet startup company now. We sell organic baby food and handmade leather goods for babies.
And let's not forget Engel's wonderful book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State. That origin is common to all three terms and is responsible for the most decisive victory of oppression in all of human history. We've decided to abolish the private appropriation of everything useful and valuable for the community as a whole. We've decided to dissolve the state by means of a polyvalent system where everyone in turn fills public positions. So what could make us hesitate in the face of that reactionary idol, the family? It needs to be completely abolished. It's the family that gives substance to the truly obscene ideas of patrimony, inheritance, hereditary, superiority on the basis of birth, blood, or race, necessary inequalities, and so forth. Gede was right to exclaim, "Families, I hate you." Well, Socrates, cat got your tongue?
Socrates, in fact, just sat there, as though he were far away. He mopped his immobile brow. The silence persisted, and the young people, feeling uneasy, didn't dare break it. At last, Socrates said softly, almost under his breath,
Your elder brother Plato thought he could speak in my name about this strange subject, the family. He took off from a few careless remarks of mine, and he has me say something like this: Women will be shared in common by all the men. No woman of them shall live privately with any one man. Children will also be shared in common. Fathers won't know who their children are, nor will children know who their fathers are. Now, with all due respect to your brother, this vision of the family within the Republic leaves one with a few questions. We ask, what's responsible for amorous encounters, sexual relationships, the symbolic order of inheritance? The answer Plato attributes to me is the state, always the state, forever the state.
The brilliant French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, who was nevertheless a great admirer of both Plato and yourself, said that the ideal city resembled a well-kept horse breeding stable. So, do you basically agree with him?
Well, Gorkon, I can understand how your brother, annoyed by this sort of resistance the family puts up to any revolutionary zeal, went to extremes, and he could see no other solution than virtually total state control of personal relationships and the abolition of private life. Now, I can understand how you might want militant fraternity in the party to be more important than family solidarities. But what I can't go along with are the consequences of that vision. Children denouncing their fathers as counter-revolutionaries, knowing that they'll be executed, and doing so not out of fear, but in the fervor of political duty. I can see a kind of terrible aesthetics of a new world in that, a convulsive vision of the new man. But the fact remains that there's something horrific about it. It has no chance of enduring.
But we saw that sort of thing again in the 60s of the 20th century. Some revolutionary groups advocated a totally collective lifestyle in communal apartments with open, public, non-exclusive sex. Desire was legitimate in and of itself, and there was nothing more moral than giving into it. Everyone was like brothers and sisters. They screwed indiscriminately without caring the least who their current partner was. That was the way it was, at least in the beginning, with American weathermen, some brave young people who wanted to rally to Chicago's white proletarians to the cause of the revolution, and who, in despair over the failure of their efforts, resorted to setting off bombs here and there, ultimately ending up in prison for the rest of their lives. Sometimes I look on those times with envy.
Well, you're wrong to. No, that's all disastrous. It leads nowhere. Dear friends, I, Socrates, won't pay that price for the necessary dissolution of the family such as it is. No, absolutely not. Taking advantage of the opportunity given me here by Badu and Mudfest, I solemnly protest your brother Plato's interpretation of my thinking.
But what then? Is this the end of everything? What will happen to us? What will we do?
Well, we can begin by drastically limiting inheritances. No one should have more than anyone else. In only a few generations, everything would return to the sphere of collective ownership. As for the rest, let's face it. The question of the family and the dialectics of private and public life is simply the cross that communism's got to bear. Because love, which is truth too, requires withdrawal, requires that a certain amount of invisibility be granted it. We cannot pursue the path that would involve eliminating all distinction between public and private life, simply because of the very reactionary burden that family life represents.
Maybe there's not such a contradiction after all. Did they not say of the great leader Ceausescu that he sought to create communism in one family?
But Glaucon, the threat also doesn't come solely from communist ventures. Think of corrupt democracies, the political regimes of decrepit capitalism. These states also love transparency. Politicians expose their dalliances or even their orgies to public view. The desire to eradicate love's creative secrets was so blatant in the countries where it was declared that politics was in command that it swept everything away before it. But it's just as much at work in countries where money is in command. In those countries, love's secret gratuitousness infuriates the capitalists who govern. They much prefer the lucrative public profits of pornography. In both cases, they object to the fact that, where all non-political truths are concerned, we still need withdrawal, silence, and refuge. This is true, after all, for artists and mathematicians, too.
What withdrawal? But how can you withdraw from the space in which you don't even exist?
Yet this issue of withdrawal, of the separation between private and public life, has had family life as its dominant form, right from the origins of humanity. Even the greatest lovers have needed to create that kind of refuge for their private lives. And the result of this love, endowed with refuge, is that when children are born, they are welcomed into the grace of privacy, not mercilessly exposed to the tumult of public indifference. So, in the final analysis, eliminating the family is something both necessary and extremely difficult. Let's bear this cross, young people, and move on. We'll have to bear it until such time as the real movement has given rise to the idea we're currently lacking where this issue is concerned.
So, in short, when it comes to the family, intimate power of love leads you to Wittgenstein's maxim. What we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence.
Well, Samantha, let's say instead that we're waiting for the day when, with regard to the family and its truly problematic relationship with love and children, we'll finally be able to think what we cannot speak about, we must do.
This is so different than what I've been saying from the very start. Or it is, but only for you and your holdout, Socrates. For my part, I'm ready to go. The fact is, the child remains the perpetual horizon, the receptacle for all projections and deferrals in some always impossible future. It's true, anyway, that the only status our opposition has to the families and us taking the death drive seriously.
My wife died on Friday night. Saturday she was buried. Sunday was my courting day. Monday I got married.
No. We cannot go back in time to the moment before our difference from men was interpreted as being something less. No. Will we make female freedom depend on culture which, from time immemorial, has nourished itself on the contempt of our sex?
No. We will do the opposite. I address myself to these absurd men no longer. We bind ourselves in a pact of freedom with our sisters, and through them, with the world.
But wait, I'm a woman too. Here's my membership card to the Union of Queer Communist Shit-Dickers.
Well, folks, it seems time for me to leave my position of the observer of the supposedly inevitable and natural course of history. There is no neutral position in the battle for emancipation. There's only truth.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for this fine and talented cast who were able to bring you this production. They worked very hard for it. Let's have a hand for them. Great group of people. Thanks for sticking with us. A little different here for Prattsville and Mudfest.